So as we all know, Terence Crawford was recently stripped of his IBF welterweight title for failing to defend against his mandatory challenger, Jerome "Boots" Ennis, and Ennis has now been elevated to IBF welterweight champion. Now, Ennis has come out and said that he wants to still fight Terence Crawford. He's not satisfied with just getting that vacant belt. No, he wants to smoke with Crawford. So to quote him directly, he said, "Come get your belt back if you think you're the best in the world." Now, the reason this story is interesting to me is because there is a narrative out there. There's been some members of my Element group, for example, who have expressed this view that Boots Ennis never really wanted to fight Terence Crawford and that there's some type of shenanigans going on behind the scenes with PBC whereby they've arranged it for Terence Crawford to get stripped of one of his belts and for the vacant title to go to Boots Ennis. Therefore, they can have two fighters who are world champions and then maybe build up to that fight somewhere in the future. One of the pieces of evidence they use to substantiate this claim is the fact that Boots Ennis actually turned down the opportunity to fight Terence Crawford in the last 18 months sometime. Now, that is true. He did turn down the opportunity to fight Terence Crawford. However, that would have been a voluntary defense for Crawford, meaning Boots Ennis wouldn't have got the best deal. And Boots Ennis was on the brink of becoming mandatory challenger at that point. So it actually makes no sense whatsoever if you're Boots Ennis to accept the deal that Terence Crawford offered you if you're going to be made mandatory very soon. If you know you're going to be made mandatory very soon, because as a mandatory challenger, you're going to get a better deal unless you're a cash cow, which Boots Ennis isn't at this point. But anyone who isn't a cash cow, you're better off becoming mandatory. And you not only get the guaranteed 30% split, but also in the standard mandatory contract, you don't have to have a rematch. So if you beat the guy who is champion, you can sail off into the sunset. You can fight whoever you want next. You're not going to be tied down to fight him again. You see, so it just made no sense at all for Boots Ennis to fight Terence Crawford as Crawford's voluntary challenger, a voluntary defense. So I don't see that as evidence personally of Boots Ennis not wanting the fight. I believe that Boots Ennis does want the fight with Terence Crawford. I think he's always wanted to fight with Terence Crawford. I think he was desperate to fight the winner of the Crawford-Errol Spence undisputed unification bout. And I think he's disappointed that Terence Crawford is tied down to this rematch with Errol Spence. Apparently, I mean, we haven't heard anything about it lately, and that has precluded Terence Crawford from defending against Boots Ennis. I think Ennis personally would have preferred that because fighters, of course, do want money. They also want glory because they know that with glory comes even more money. So yes, you get a certain amount of money when you become a world champion. You know, your purses get higher, the contracts favor you for championship bouts and so on. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to fill arenas. You need to be able to sell pay-per-views, so on and so forth. Your name needs to be popping out there. And the way that you get your name popping isn't just by picking up a belt. That's usually not enough. The way you get your name popping is by taking the scalp of one of the big boys who are already up there, who are in a position commercially where you want to be. And Terence Crawford, he's a late bloomer really in terms of his commercial value. Following the first fight with Errol Spence, his name's popping. So it would make sense for Jerome Ennis to want to target him. Not every fighter is going to want to target Terence Crawford. Some fighters will be happy just to pick up a belt and, you know, sit it out for a while and maybe hope that Crawford moves up or the division gets weak, you know, defend their one belt against hand-picked opponents. Of course, there are going to be some champions who are like that. Many champions who are like that. But in my opinion, I could be wrong, but in my opinion, Jerome Ennis isn't one of those guys. I think Jerome Ennis really believes in his ability and he wants all the smoke. So those of you who are not familiar with Jerome Ennis, I can't imagine there are many of you. He is currently 31-0, 28 KOs. And the 28 KOs, he hasn't exactly been fighting the top quality opposition all his career. He's obviously fought his fair share of pies, especially early on, as most fighters do. Nevertheless, it's a very high KO percentage for a top-level welterweight. Most top-level welterweights don't have KO percentages like this. Terence Crawford, of course, is a closer. He's a finisher. He gets people out of there. But most of the top welterweights over the past 5, 6, 7, even 10 years haven't really had that kind of knockout percentage. They tend to go the distance in most of their fights. Whereas with Boots Ennis, he's getting people out of there. Last fight he had was against a guy called Roman Villa. Stopped him in 10 rounds. Then he won a UD against the guy whose surname I will not try to pronounce, but he was 21-1. And he fought Cosito Clayton. That was back in 2022. Knocked him out in 2 rounds. Thomas Delorme, I'm sure most of you guys are familiar with him. Stopped him in 1. Sergey Lipinets, we're all familiar with him. Stopped him in 6. Chris Van Heerden, that was an no contest in 1. Juan Carlos Abreu, we're familiar with him as well. He was stopped in 6 by Boots Ennis. And as you go back, you'll see the pattern continues. So he is a knockout puncher. He's 26 years of age. He's from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's a southpaw. He is the most athletically gifted welterweight I have seen for many years. He's got tremendous hand speed when he lets his shots go. As I say, he's powerful. His weakness that I've seen so far, his most obvious weakness, is his defense. Not that his defense is bad, although he hasn't fought anybody with elite offense to really have it tested like that. But he's had fighters that shouldn't really be landing clean on him land clean on him. So you wonder what's going to happen if he steps in there against a Terence Crawford who knows how to get the shots on target. So yeah, Ennis has some question marks over his defense for sure. I haven't seen any question marks over his chin. I've got no reason to question his chin at this stage because nobody's ever wobbled him as far as I'm aware. So we will see as he steps up in competition, as he fights bigger punches, how his chin fares. Now, Terence Crawford, as we know, a much older guy, 36 years of age. So there's a 10-year age gap here. I forgot to mention the fact that Boots Ennis is 5'10" with a 74-inch reach. So he's a big welterweight. I mean, a very big welterweight. A 74-inch reach is the same as Terence Crawford. Crawford uses that reach very, very well. Abnormally long arms for somebody who's 5'8". Okay, Boots Ennis is 5'10" and he's got a 74-inch reach. Terence Crawford is only 5'8". He's got the same reach. And just to put it in perspective, Mike Tyson is 5'10" and he's got a 71-inch reach. All right, we're talking about a 5'10" heavyweight with a 71-inch reach compared to a 5'8" welterweight whose reach is significantly longer than Mike Tyson's. As I say many times, reach and arm length are different measurements. Here on screen, you can see this is how reach is measured from fingertip to fingertip. It is your wingspan, whereas arm length is measured from the armpit to the end of the fist, which I think is a more accurate measurement or a more useful measurement. Let's just put it that way. Only HBO ever seemed to use the arm length measurement. I don't know why it's not the standard in boxing. Anyway, it's a little bugbear of mine. I've always been a big admirer of Terence Crawford as a fighter. I think he's a fantastic talent. I think he's always wanted the smoke, but sometimes people change once they get the bag. It's just that simple. Sometimes you've been struggling on the outside, as Terence Crawford has for the longest time. He hasn't been getting the fights he wanted with the PBC guys until he finally did this deal with PBC. He's secured the bag now, and sometimes fighters, or very often fighters in that position, say they want to make the most out of it, or their mindset changes. They want to make the most out of the bag because they've been denied it for so long. So they're not about to risk their position unless there's a massive financial incentive. Now, I'm not accusing Terence Crawford of ducking Boots Ennis just yet, but if there comes an opportunity to fight Boots and he doesn't take it, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. Unless there's some better opportunity against the more proven fighter, in which case I'll say fair enough. But if he's staying at welterweight and there's an opportunity to fight Boots, it would be a unification. I know once you become undisputed and you're still unbeaten, undisputed again doesn't really matter so much, but it's the name. And I think that Boots Ennis is going to go on to be one of the top fighters in boxing in the coming years. And if Terence Crawford were to have a victory over him, that would really help his legacy, because really and truly, as great a fighter as Terence Crawford has been, he doesn't have a Sugar Ray Leonard resume. He doesn't have a Floyd Mayweather resume. He doesn't even have, could you argue he doesn't have a Andre Ward resume? His resume doesn't stack up to many of the very, very great fighters, certainly not at welterweight. And you could say it's not his fault. In any event, he needs, in my view, if he's going to be considered up there with the likes of the Leonards, and I'm not talking about where you think his ability is, how you think he would match up against Leonard or Mayweather in some type of fantasy matchup, because that's all too opinion-based. There's too much speculation. Greatness has to be primarily, not completely, but primarily measured on a guy's resume. If Terence Crawford were to get a win over Boots Ennis, it may age very well. Just as Floyd Mayweather's win over Canelo Alvarez has aged very, very well. The greater Canelo Alvarez becomes, the greater Mayweather becomes as a result. So similar thing potentially if Terence Crawford were to go in there, fight and beat Jerome Boots Ennis. That's my take on it. Give me your take in the comment section below.
Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment, you can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.